chapter or this book, the second letter to the Corinthians. And we'll look at section number 1, the design of the second epistle to the Corinthians. In the introduction to the first epistle to the Corinthians, the situation and character of the city of Corinth. Then I'll pause just a minute and let till writing stops. The history of the church there and the design which Paul had in view in writing to them at first have been fully stated. To have a full understanding of the design of this epistle, those facts should be borne in distinct remembrance. And the reader is referred to the statement there made as material to a correct understanding of this epistle. It was shown there that an important part of Paul's design at that time was to reprove the irregularities which existed in the church at Corinth. I would dare to say that if the Corinthian church was in existence today, we probably wouldn't want anything to do with it because they had so many things going wrong. So this he had done with great fidelity. He had not only answered the inquiries which they proposed to him, but he had gone with great peculiarity into an examination of the gross disorders of which he had learned by some members of the family of Chloe. Yes. Particularity. Peculiarity. All right, particularity. That'll satisfy our producer. That's what we'll say, particularity.
I get it as well.
All right, a large part of the epistle, therefore, was the language of severe reproof. There was a day he wouldn't dare have done that, but
But you can't catch it now.
yeah. But anyhow, he and Jeremy always catching me on something anymore. Used to they couldn't, but I guess I'm getting old. I don't know.
You used to do it to us.
Yes, I did. Yeah, turnabout's fair play now. Yes, I used to correct them all the time. You're right. Paul felt its necessity, and he had employed that language with unwavering fidelity to his master. Examination. All right, yet it was natural that he should feel great solicitude or in regard to the reception of that letter and to its influence in accomplishing what he wished. He was a little bit apprehensive, I think, as to how that they would receive what he had written to them in the first letter. And he had great reason to be apprehensive, I think, because they could have taken it the wrong way, and that would have exacerbated the wrongs that they were doing. But they took the rebuke to heart and did the changes that he had commanded. And he had the authority to command those changes.
Brother Joe,
Yes, sir.
on those changes and things that seem to be going on in the church of Corinth, that I'm talking about in the book of Galatians, the church of Galatians, it's almost it wasn't a, like Galatians, soon removed. It was a, very subtle move in a long period of time. That's what I get here. And so things were not noticed, you know.
It was like the frog in the pan of water on the stove.
Yeah.
You put him into a hot pan of water, he'll jump right out. But you put him in a pan of water and you gradually add the heat to it, you cook him because he won't know to jump out. He won't know the difference. And I sort of compare that with the situation at Corinth. The changes came about, but in such a subtle way and a slow way that all of a sudden you're faced with it. And you probably, they probably did not realize all of this until Paul called it to their attention. And then that caused them to have a rude awakening. The letter had been sent from Ephesus, where Paul proposed to remain until after the succeeding Pentecost. That's in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse number 8. Evidently, hoping by that time to hear from them and to learn what had been the manner of the reception of his epistle. He proposed then to go to Macedonia, and from that place to go again to Corinth. And that's 1 Corinthians 16, verses 5 through 7. But he was evidently desirous to learn in what manner his first epistle had been received and what its effect, or what was its effect before he visited them. He wanted a heads up to know basically what he was walking into if he got there again, which he did. I will say that. He did get back there. He went with Timothy and Erastus before him. He sent Timothy and Erastus before him to Macedonia and Achaia. And you see that in Acts 19:22 and 1 Corinthians 16, verse 10. Intending that they should visit Corinth and commission Timothy to regulate the disordered affairs in the church there. It would appear also that he sent Titus to the church, there in order to observe the effect which his epistle would produce and to return and report to him. That's chapter 2, verses 13, and chapter 7, 6 through 16. Evidently, Paul felt much solicitude on the subject, and the manner in which they received his admonitions would do much to regulate his own future movements. He was sort of gauging his or planning what he was going to do based on their reception of his letters. An important case of discipline, his authority as an apostle, and the interests in religion in an important city and in a church which he had himself founded were all at stake. There was a lot riding on their reception to his admonition. So in this state of mind, he himself left Ephesus and went to Troas on his way to Macedonia, where it appears he had appointed Titus to meet him and to report to him the manner in which his first epistle had been received. And see the note on 2 Corinthians 13. 2:13. But his mind was greatly agitated and distressed because he did not meet Titus as he had expected. And in this state of mind, he went forward to Macedonia. There, he had a direct interview with Titus, and that's chapter 16, verse 5 and 6. You know, I said chapter 7, verses 5 and 6, did I not? I said 16? Wow, okay.
6+1.
All right. That references 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. Okay. Sorry, I can't read either. And learned from him that his first epistle had accomplished all which he had desired. Now, that's chapter 7, verses 7 through 16. There's the 16. He's looking ahead. That's what's happening. Yeah. The act of discipline, which he had directed, had been performed. The abuses had been in a great measure corrected, and the Corinthians had been brought to a state of true repentance for their former irregularities and disorders. Now, you know, part of those was they refused to take action on the young man that was involved in the immorality. And another was their abuses of the Lord's Supper. Yes, sir.
Joe, going back, the young man that was involved in that, sometimes you'll have a church because of the status of maybe a family or who that is, they won't deal with it
Mm-hmm.
because of the status.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a giving family or something, because if they deal with that one, that group's going to leave or whatever. And it may have been the same thing was going on.
It's possible.
We don't know. We just know he was doing.
Right. However, there are indications around the end of 2 Corinthians that he did repent and was restored to the church. I can't remember what verses those are. I'm not going to deal with that specifically in this overview. The heart of Paul was greatly comforted by this intelligence and by the signal success which had attended this effort to produce reform. And that's what he wanted. In this state of mind, he wrote to them this second letter. Now, Titus had spent some time in Corinth. He had had an opportunity of learning the views of the parties and of ascertaining the true condition of the church. The epistle is designed to meet some of the prevailing views of the party which was opposed to him there, and to refute some of the prevailing slanders in regard to himself. Apparently, there were some that did not think that he had the authority to rebuke the church as he did.
Who, Titus or Paul?
No, Paul.
Gotcha.
No, Titus, it appears that Titus was there on a see only, do nothing only, so to speak. The epistle, therefore, is occupied to a considerable extent in refuting the slanderers bad had bad which bad
Which had, it should have been had.
yeah, it looks that way. He's left out a word. Had been heaped upon him, and in vindicating his own character. The letter also he sent by the hands of Titus, by whom the former had been sent, and he designed, doubtless, that the presence of Titus should aid in accomplishing the objects which he had in view in the epistle. And that's chapter 8, verses 17 and 18. So we're looking now at section 2, the subjects that he addressed in this epistle. It has been generally admitted that this epistle is written without definite arrangement or plan. It treats on a variety of topics, mainly as they occupied to or occurred to the mind of the apostle at the time, and perhaps without having formed any definite arrangement before he commenced writing it. Those subjects are all important, and they're all treated in the usual manner of Paul, and they're all useful and interesting to the church at large. But we shall not find in this epistle the same systematic arrangement which is apparent in the epistle to the Romans or which occurs in the first epistle to the Corinthians. Some of the subjects of which it treats are the following. Number one, he mentions his own sufferings, and particularly his late trials in Asia. For deliverance from those trials, he expresses his gratitude to God and states the design for which God called him to endure such trials to have been that he might be better qualified to comfort others who might be afflicted in a similar matter. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. And I might add here, many times the Lord will allow us to go through things in order that we might be capable of helping others going through basically the same things as well. Right. That's right. The second thing, he vindicates himself from one of the accusations which his enemies had brought against him, that he was unstable and fickle-minded. He had promised to visit them, and he had not yet fulfilled that promise. They took occasion, therefore, to say that he was unstable, that he was afraid to visit them. Well, as we're going to see in a couple of lessons, he did get back there. Probably much to the chagrin of those that were really standing against him. He shows to them in reply the true reason why he had not come to them, and that his real object in not doing it had been to spare them. Chapter 1, verses 13 through 24. The third case, the case of the unhappy individual who had been guilty of incest, had deeply affected his mind. He had felt deep solicitude in regard to. Sorry, you changed it. I didn't notice it. Thank you. In the first epistle, he had treated of this case at large and had directed that discipline should be exercised. He had judged. He had felt deep solicitude in regard to the manner in which his commands on that subject should be received, and had judged it best not to visit them until he should be informed of the manner in which they had complied with his directions. In other words, if he had visited them in person, it would not be pretty. Since they had obeyed him and had inflicted discipline on him, he now exhorts them to forgive the unhappy man and to receive him again to their fellowship. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And the fourth thing, he mentions the deep solicitude which he had on this subject, and his disappointment when he came to Troas and did not meet with Titus as he had expected, and had not been informed, as he hoped to have been, of the manner in which his former epistle had been received. Chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. In view of the manner in which they had received his former epistle and the success of his efforts, which he learned when he reached Macedonia, he gives thanks to God that all his efforts to promote the welfare of the church had been successful. Again, chapter 2 and verses 14 through 17. 5, Paul vindicates his character, and his claims to be regarded as an apostle. He assures them that he does not need letters of commendation to them, since they were fully acquainted with his character. In other words, you know who I am. You do not have to have me introduced to you. The subject leads him into an examination of the nature of the ministry and its importance, which he illustrates by showing the comparative obscurity of the Mosaic ministrations and the greater dignity and permanency of the gospel. And that's chapter 3, verses 7 through 18. The sixth thing in 2 Corinthians chapters 4 and 5, he states the principles by which he was actuated in the ministry. He and the other apostles were greatly afflicted and were subjected to great and special trials, but they had also great and unusual consolations. They were sustained with the hope of heaven and with the assurance that there was a world of glory. They acted in view of that world and had gone forth in view of it to entreat people to be reconciled to God. And 7, having referred to 2 Corinthians 5 to the nature and objects of the Christian ministry, he expatiates, thank you, with great beauty on the temper with which he and his brethren, in the midst of great trials and afflictions, executed this important work. That was chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. The eighth reason, having in this manner pursued a course of remark that was calculated to conciliate their regard and to show his affection for them, he exhorts them in chapter 6, verses 11 through 18, to avoid those connections which would injure their piety and which were inconsistent with the gospel which they professed to love. In other words, he was saying, all right, you say that you love the gospel, but your actions are not matching your words. The connections to which he particularly referred to, improper marriages and ruinous alliances with idolaters, to which they were particularly exposed. And 9 in 2 Corinthians 7, he again makes a transition to Titus and to the joy which he had brought him and the intelligence which he gave of the manner in which the commands of Paul in the first epistle had been received, and of its happy effect on the minds of the Corinthians. And number 10 in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Paul refers to and discusses the subject on which his heart was so much set: the collection for the poor and afflicted Christians in Judea. He had commenced the collection in Macedonia and had boasted to them that the Corinthians would aid largely in that benevolent work. And he now sent Titus to complete it in Corinth. So Titus was not only to observe, but he was, in this second letter, he was to collect this offering that would be going together with much other collections, and Paul and his party would then take it to Jerusalem. Number 11, in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, he enters upon a vindication of himself and of his apostolic authority against the accusation of his enemies, and pursues the subject through 2 Corinthians chapter 11 by a comparison of himself with others, and in 2 Corinthians 12 by an argument directly in favor of his apostolic authority from the favors which God had bestowed on him. And the evidence which he had given of his having been commissioned by God. This subject he pursues also in various illustrations to the end of the epistle. So the objects of this epistle, therefore, and the subjects discussed are various. They are to show his deep interest in their welfare, to express his gratitude that his former letter had been so well received and had so effectively accomplished what he wished to accomplish, to carry forward the work of reformation among them, which had been so auspiciously commenced to vindicate his authority as an apostle from the objections which he had learned through Titus they had continued to make, to secure the collection for the poor saints in Judea, on which his heart had been so much set. And to assure them of his intention to come and visit them according to his repeated promises. The epistle is substantially of the same character as the first. I want to back up to the last statement there for just a minute. Paul promised to go and see them again. I'll just give you a little preview. Paul goes there and spends about 3 months there, and while he's there, he writes the book of Romans. Romans is coming up next. Duh. Okay. It was written to a church where great dissertations, I read that one already. The epistle is substantially, okay, I got that. It was written to a church where great dissensions and other evils prevailed. It was designed to promote a reformation and is a model of the manner, I would say, in which evils are to be corrected in a church. I don't know. I just copied it. I didn't type that.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In connection with the first epistle, it shows the manner in which offenders in the church are to be dealt with, and the spirit and design with which the work of discipline should be entered on and pursued. There is a proper way for church discipline to take place. Though these were local evils, yet great principles are involved here of use to the church in all ages. And to these epistles, the church must refer at all times as an illustration of the proper manner of administering discipline and of silencing the calumnies of enemies. Now, I know that you will notice that he is using the word church in the institutional sense. Okay? Unless there be some confusion about that.
He is not referring to the universal church.
He is not referring to a universal church. No, he's not. He is saying that as an institution, this is what the church needs to do concerning the subject of discipline. It is manifest that this epistle was written from Macedonia. You can see chapter 8, verses 1 through 14, and chapter 9, verse 2, and was sent by Titus to the church at Corinth. If so, it was written probably about a year after the former epistle. Paul was on his way to Corinth and was expecting to go there soon. He had left Ephesus, where he was when he wrote the first epistle, and had gone to Troas. And from thence to Macedonia, where he had met with Titus and had learned, and from him had learned what was the effect of his first epistle. And in the overflowing of his heart with gratitude for the success of that letter and with a desire to carry forward the work of reformation in the church and completely to remove all the objections which had been made to his apostolic authority, and to prepare for his own welcome reception when he went there, he wrote this letter, a letter which we cannot doubt was as kindly received as the former, and which, like that, accomplished the objects which he had in view. Now, before we get to the conclusion, any questions or comments? We went through this rather rapidly with not too many comments and questions. So,
Just want to state, I fixed several mistakes in the commentary provided, spelling and such. I missed the bad, it should have been had, and the M.
Okay.
There were several that I did fix, but like you don't sometimes, and you try to correct those, but at the same time, you don't want to change what the author had intended. And
I usually, when I'm quoting, I usually don't change any mistakes or anything that are in the writer's text.
I do know that sometimes commentaries are copied or are digitized from
Yes.
printed materials,
Right.
and had looking like bad, digitized happens a lot because of
Yes.
the type font used for the H has feet on it, and sometimes when they're scanned in to digitize them, the computer reads that as a B. It's close enough and reads it as a B. And
It
I try to look at those things. But
it really depends on how good the optics of the scanner is,
and how degraded
and how
the pages that you're
right,
that are being.
how what the quality of those pages that you're scanning, because sometimes when you're scanning something, it won't come out to be anything like what's supposed to be, and there are a lot of factors to that. But anyway, all right. Excuse me. So in conclusion, in the next part, we will see that Paul will write the next book, the book of Romans, an epistle to the church located in Rome. And we will see where he goes when he writes that. I've already given you a preview.
You've been listening to the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church in Smyrna, Tennessee. We invite you to tune in at the same time next Wednesday evening for another live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study. We would love to see your comments regarding this broadcast. You may email us at imbr@imbmpodcast.com. That's imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Or you may write to us at International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. That's International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. Thank you for listening, and may you have a blessed day.